Hello and welcome to Deep Dive on NewsX World. I'm Sumika Tauka and today we turn to the Arctic, where strategic ambitions, natural resources, and a controversial US president have put Greenland at the center of global discussion. In August 2019, President Donald Trump made headlines when he publicly expressed interest in acquiring Greenland. Trump called the idea strategically interesting and suggested that it could be a valuable addition to the United States. Trump described Greenland as almost like an incredible piece of real estate and repeatedly emphasized its potential for military and economic value. In fact, let's listen into his most recent comments.
He viewed Louisiana, the Louisiana Purchase. He said, I'm governor of Louisiana. And he said, I didn't call him, he called me. He's very proactive. He's a great guy. He's a deal guy. He's a deal maker type guy. And we need it for national protection. We need Greenland for national protection. They have a very small population. And I don't know, they say Denmark, but Denmark has spent no money. They have no military protection. If they say that Denmark was there 300 years ago or something with a boat, well, we were there with boats too, I'm sure. So we'll have to work it all out. But he felt very strongly we need it for we need Greenland for national security, not for minerals. We have so many sites for minerals and oil and everything. We have more oil than any other country in the world. We need Greenland for national security. And if you take a look at Greenland, you look up and down the coast, you have Russian and Chinese ships all over the place. We need it for national security. We have to have it. And he wanted to lead the charge. So we're making him, Marco, today, a special envoy to Greenland.
National security, that's what President Trump says his interest in Greenland is about. But a closer examination suggests that there are many underlying reasons and security is only the tip of the iceberg. At first glance, Greenland might seem remote and uninhabited. But strategically, it is far from marginal. Situated between North America and Europe, it lies directly over the North Atlantic air routes and near the Arctic sea lanes, which are rapidly becoming accessible as ice melts due to global warming. In military terms, as Trump says, Greenland is crucial. It hosts early warning radar stations that track missiles across the northern hemisphere, and its location offers the US and NATO a strategic advantage against Russian missile and naval movements in the Arctic region. Controlling Greenland would give the United States unprecedented control over Arctic airspace, sea routes, and early warning networks. It would also provide a forward base near Russia, China, and NATO allies, a positional advantage that previous US presidents have only partially achieved. However, economically speaking, Greenland has so much more to offer. It sits on layers of rare earth elements, uranium and zinc, as well as copper, resources critical to high-tech industries, battery production, and modern weapons systems. Trump has earlier hinted that Greenland's natural wealth made it an attractive target for acquisition. This mineral wealth is largely untapped, with rare earth elements critical to tech and energy transition. Acquiring the island would place the US at the center of global supply chains. Finally, there is the question of an unprecedented political legacy. Trump, whose foreign policy often favors transactions over tradition, sees Greenland as an iconic deal, a tangible, highly visibly acquisition that would be seen as a showcase of American power. But not everyone shares Trump's vision. Denmark, which maintains sovereignty over Greenland, reacted with open hostility. The Danish Prime Minister called the idea of selling Greenland absurd and summoned the US ambassador in Copenhagen to express official disapproval. In a rare move, Danish authorities also classified the US itself as a potential national security threat, a response that reflects long-standing frustrations with Trump's diplomatic style. For a key EU and NATO member to classify the USA as a national security threat puts the NATO alliance on unprecedented shaky grounds. Now, Greenland is home to a small but politically active population that strongly values autonomy. The idea of an American purchase was widely mocked locally, and Denmark made clear that sovereign rights cannot be negotiated like real estate. Let's listen into what the people think of Trump's repeated statements about purchasing Greenland.
Det er lidt, man ved ikke, om man skal tage ham alvorligt, eller om der lige pludselig kommer et eller andet. Så det er sådan lidt.
Je crois que les commentaires du président Trump constituent des menaces envers les Groenlandais et notre société. Ce n'est pas quelque chose qui nous plaît. Ce n'est pas acceptable dans un monde civilisé, en fait.
Jeg synes, Trump skal læse op på sin historie og på de aftaler, der ligger mellem det danske kongerige og USA.
Strategically, the Arctic is rapidly becoming a global flashpoint. As ice recedes, new shipping lanes open, and competing powers, Russia, China, NATO nations are racing to establish military presence and resource claims. For the US, Greenland is not just an island. It is a gateway to Arctic dominance. Trump's comments have highlighted the complexity of US-Denmark relations. Copenhagen has maintained a strategic alliance for decades, but public threats and unilateral ambitions strain trust. For Trump, the message is clear. Power, strategy, and economic interests can override traditional diplomacy. For Denmark and Greenland, the message is equally clear. Sovereignty is not negotiable. The big question now, is this interest merely rhetoric, or could Greenland become a real-time focus of US geostrategy? The Arctic winter is long, the resources are valuable, and the location is unmatched. Any future US move would have to balance military logistics, local autonomy, and international reaction, especially from NATO and Russia. For the world, Trump's Greenland ambition reveals something larger about modern power, geography, resources, and strategic position that can make even the most remote places central to global politics. As ice melts and the Arctic becomes accessible, the question is no longer if Greenland matters, but how far America is willing to go to acquire it. For this discussion, we are being joined by Mr. Keith Vaz. He's a former British minister, joins us live from Dubai. Thank you very much, Mr. Keith, for joining us once again. Good to see you. Now, looking at
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now, looking at Greenland and US, how much of Trump's Greenland push is actual strategic planning versus political signaling? What do you think?
Well, it could be dismissed as a sensational soundbite. The problem is, even though he's been saying it for some time, following the invasion of Venezuela, everything has changed. People, countries are taking this very seriously indeed. And not to accept this as a serious threat would be a mistake. If President Trump invades Greenland and tries to take it over and annex it as a country in the UA, and annex it in the country that is part of the USA, that will be the end of NATO as we know it, the end of the Atlantic Alliance. Great allies that have been allies of the United States for years and years and years will no longer be able to deal with him in that way. So this is a big, big step if he defies his colleagues and decides what to do is to annex Greenland.
Right. Thank you for highlighting that. And Mr. Keith, does Denmark labeling the US a security threat mark a lasting alliance shift?
Well, it will be. I don't think everyone accepts that this particular area needs to be secure, but Denmark and NATO as a whole has got it covered. Why does it affect the strategic interests of America over Canada? After all, if you look at any map, Canada is as close to Greenland as the United States, and they've not decided that they want to take over Greenland. This is a massive step if he defies his allies, France, Germany, Spain, Italy, and the United Kingdom and decides to do this invasion. It would be terrible. And I don't think that the Atlantic Alliance, NATO, would recover from this. The only winners would be those people who want to see the destruction of NATO. This is a mistake, a huge mistake, which he will regret. And, they'll have to go to war. If somebody comes and invades your country, you can't just let them take it over. You can't just roll over. You actually have to fire back, don't you?
Yes.
Can you imagine? I mean, it's unimaginable.
Yes.
If this happens.
Yes, 100%, of course. And lastly, Mr. Vaz, does Trump's approach to normalize territorial acquisition in modern geopolitics?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. What did you say?
Yes. So my question is, does Trump's approach normalize or change territorial acquisition in modern geopolitics?
It completely revolutionizes it. It goes against the main basis of the United Nations and sovereignty. It's for people to decide who their rulers are going to be in an election. That's how President Trump legitimately is the president of the United States, because he's faced an election and he's won. So what he's proposing to do in Greenland is the opposite of that. It's actually the opposite of the US Constitution. You can't just go into countries you disagree with. So this is a serious step. Everyone needs to be firm in the way in which they deal with this.
Yes, indeed. With that, I would like to thank Mr. Keith Vaz for joining us as a former British minister from Dubai. Thank you very much. That was all for this episode of Deep Dive. Stay tuned to NewsX World for more news and updates.
In the midst of death, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
Hello and welcome to Deep Dive on NewsX World. I'm Thomas Porteous and tonight we turn to East Asia, where shockwaves from Latin America may be rippling towards the Taiwan Strait. The United States' capture of Nicolas Maduro and the rapid corporate re-entry into Venezuela's oil sector have sent a clear message across global power centers. Regime change, once unthinkable, is back on the table. And in Beijing, that message is being read very carefully. At first glance, Venezuela and Taiwan share little in common. One is a crisis-hit oil state in South America, the other a high-tech democracy at the heart of the global semiconductor supply chain. But strategically, they are connected by one idea: sovereignty under pressure. When President Donald Trump announced that Maduro had been captured and removed, it was not just a Latin American event. It was a signal that Washington is willing to use force, blockades, and economic power to rewrite political realities. Beijing noticed. Within hours of the Maduro announcement, Chinese social media erupted. On Weibo and Douyin, nationalist commentators framed the event as proof of American imperial playbooks. Hashtags translating to Venezuela today, who tomorrow began trending. State-affiliated commentators warned that any government outside the US security umbrella could be next. And then came the comparisons. Users drew direct parallels between Caracas and Taipei, arguing that if Washington can remove a hostile leader and hand the economy to corporate interests, it can just as quickly abandon an ally when costs rise. This discourse matters. In China, social media is not just public opinion, it is a testbed for state narratives. And the narrative emerging is clear. The global order is shifting and force is once again a legitimate tool. So here is the critical question. Does the US action in Venezuela set a precedent for Xi Jinping to move on to Taiwan? From Beijing's perspective, the Maduro episode confirms 3 assumptions. The first, international law will not stop a determined superpower. The second, economic rewards follow military action if you control the territory. Third, global outrage is loud but short-lived. For years, Xi has said Taiwan is a core interest and that reunification cannot be passed down generation to generation. The Maduro case may reinforce a belief in Beijing that decisive action, fast, overwhelming and presented as irreversible, is the new model. But Taiwan is not Venezuela. Taiwan sits at the center of the first island chain, a strategic barrier that contains China's naval power. It produces over 60% of the world's advanced semiconductors. And unlike Venezuela, any move on Taiwan risks direct conflict with the United States and its allies, being Japan, South Korea, and Australia. A Chinese invasion would not be a surgical strike. It would be the most complex amphibious operation since the Second World War, with no guarantee of quick victory. So why even consider it now? Strategists note that Beijing is watching 2 things very closely. The first being US willingness to engage in multiple theatres, Latin America, Europe, and the Middle East at the very same time. The second, whether American corporate interests, now re-embedded in Venezuela, signal a return to resource-driven foreign policy. If China concludes that the United States is stretched and that economic gains can offset political costs, the Taiwan calculus changes. Not tomorrow, not next month, but the direction shifts. Officially, Beijing is striking a careful tone. China's foreign ministry has condemned the US action in Venezuela as a serious violation of sovereignty, warning that forced regime change will destabilize the global system. Let's take a listen in to the statements.
中方对美方悍然对一个主权国家使用武力，并强行控制一国总统，深表震惊，予以强烈谴责。美方的这种霸权行径严重违反国际法，侵犯委内瑞拉主权，威胁拉美和加勒比地区和平与安全，中方坚决反对。我们敦促美方遵守国际法及联合国宪章宗旨和原则，停止侵犯。
On Taiwan, the statement reiterated a familiar line. Taiwan is an internal affair of China and any comparison is inappropriate. Let's have a look.
这几个国家和机构对台独分裂势力以武谋独、装聋作哑，对外部势力干涉中国内政视而不见，却对中方捍卫国家主权和领土完整的必要正义行动说三道四、颠倒黑白、混淆是非，十分虚伪。中方对此坚决反对，并已提出严正交涉。
These are diplomatically safe words, of course, but strategically the message is layered. China is warning Washington, you cannot claim rules for yourself and deny them to others. So, does the capture of Maduro make a Chinese move on Taiwan more likely? Not immediately, but it does harden thinking in Beijing. It normalises the idea that power, not process, decides outcomes, and it fuels a belief that history favours those who act, not those who wait. For Taiwan, this means heightened pressure, more military drills, more grey zone operations, more psychological warfare. For the world, it means this: the events in Caracas may one day be seen as a turning point when the shadow of force returned to global politics. As night falls over the Taiwan Strait, the question is no longer if the status quo is under threat, but how long it can hold. For more on this discussion, we're being joined by Ross Feingold. He is a political analyst and he joins us from the Taiwanese capital of Taipei, Taiwan. Thank you very much, Ross, for joining us as always. Let's get straight into this. How is the Maduro episode being interpreted inside strategic Chinese military planning circles beyond public rhetoric?
Yeah, that's a good point because it's an important distinction. So there's all the public rhetoric about international law, whether this is a precedent or not, and I'm sure many in the audience would have already seen the counterpoint from the Chinese perspective, which is to say this was always an internal matter. So what the U.S. does to a sovereign country of Venezuela, justified or not, is not comparable because the Taiwan issue for China's government is considered an internal matter. So there is that important distinction. But when it comes to the internal and the strategic, obviously there's an important element here of researching what went wrong for the Venezuelans, and specifically what went wrong with their air defense systems, some of which were purchased from China as well as from Russia. What went wrong with their intelligence and security failures? And this is not the first time we've seen this kind of colossal failure in recent months. There's the examples of the way Israel was able to access Iran and penetrate Iran's security and intelligence agencies and conduct operations within Iran, including assassinations. And then also the close-in protection. And why did the personal protection units of Maduro fail so spectacularly? Was it because there was leaks of information about his whereabouts? Were they poorly trained? Was it a combination of the above? So all of those things will be what Chinese military planners will be looking at. And of course, what assets did the United States successfully use? What was involved in the planning? How did they execute the operation? So there's certainly much for China to learn from this, and certainly a lot of that has to do with the real specifics of military planning, and not so much all this discussion about international law and precedent or not. A lot of that, frankly, is very theoretical. It's not practical when it comes to actually executing a similar operation in the future.
Indeed, Ross. And of course, moving to Xi's Beijing, do you think Chinese leaders see US actions in Venezuela as proof that speed and decisiveness can outweigh international backlash?
Not necessarily, because the reality is China has been threatening to take Taiwan literally for decades, ever since the end of the Chinese Civil War in 1949. Now, for a long time, they frankly just didn't have the military capability to execute that kind of operation. And for a long time, Taiwan arguably had a qualitative military advantage, especially in the air. But that has changed significantly in recent decades as China has invested tremendously in its military, as its technological capabilities have improved to the point where it does have a qualitative and quantitative advantage over the Taiwan military at present. But they still haven't moved. They've, as you mentioned, they've increased the number of large-scale military exercises, including the one last week that they conduct near Taiwan, the regular sorties of their aircraft that enter Taiwan's air defense identification zone, or their ships sailing closer to Taiwan than they did in the past. But they still haven't tried to attack Taiwan. They still haven't invaded Taiwan. And we don't know exactly why that is. Maybe they still don't think they have the capability. Maybe they're concerned about the global political and economic repercussions, which is a possibility. There's the possibility that the U.S. and Japan and Australia will come to Taiwan's aid. There's the possibility of significant trade sanctions that other countries would impose if China did do that. So they're not moving fast. And the fact that the U.S. was able to execute such a fast operation, which was not a full-scale invasion, of course. Again, there's certainly much for China to learn, but it's not necessarily analogous. And just to put a conclusion on that point, China's goal is unification, to control Taiwan. So just kidnapping the president, the way, analogous to the United States capturing Maduro and bringing him to the United States for a prosecution. But for China just to kidnap Taiwan's president, that doesn't achieve China's goal by itself, which is unification. So their goal is completely different than the United States' goal.
And does the United States' use of force in Caracas strengthen deterrence for